be vaporized, but the rest of the nation will survive after some radiation fallout sickness.
Was that what 888 was, with Cheney and Georgia trying to go ahead and get the war then? Remember when Cheney, had them roll in, to northern Georgia, and the Russians rolled nukes in, and that whole fracas in 2008? The whole Georgian conflict, was that an attempt?
Oh, Georgia, that you're talking about internationally. That's a little complex. It wasn't a prelude to this. What that was is the globalists know that one of the things that will lead to war is the Russians will begin to use the millions of Russians that they've moved into the former Soviet states and the Baltics, use them as provocation to justify Russian militarism and going in to protect those people. They will create agent provocateurs just like Hitler did in the Sudetenland, Czechoslovakia, and Danzig, create attacks on the Russian people, then justify showing finally the new Russian military force moving in to protect those people. Georgia was one of those provocations that the U.S. handed the Russians so that they could begin that process. There will be others, but that was a first in the preserve the motherland people, which will, and when I've told people in my World Affairs brief that one of the reasons you'll know that war is getting close is when Russia starts to move troops back in to the former Soviet states to protect Russian people. Now, I think the actual trigger for the war will be North Korea attacking South Korea, because that requires that the U.S. use nuclear weapons to stop it. There's no way you can stop North Korea.
And then China has a treaty.
And China has a treaty. And so if the U.S. can be induced to use nuclear weapons to stop a Chinese invasion of South Korea, which is overwhelming, we don't have enough troops. Our troops are being maintained there as cannon fodder so that we can get struck, we can get bloodied.
Pearl Harbored, yeah.
And then, of course, China will then have an excuse to come in and use nuclear weapons in Russia because we got to stop this first use by the United States of nuclear weapons, stop the bully of the world.
And Russia comes right over beside North Korea. They've got land right there. Let me expand to the south. The whole Red Dawn scenario. I know there's been big inroads by Russia in Mexico and other areas of Latin America. What happens if there is this first strike, a stand down, and then all this takes place? Won't they try to, because I've already seen this through the Ford Foundation, the rest of it, again, handing it to Russia, the Ford Foundation and others, hyping up this La Raza, La Reconquista, Aslan, Southwest, and I hear that from those groups, we're going to come with the commies and just pour right in up and then make that a racial type deal. I mean, how does that add into the constellation?
From what defectors, what information I've got from defectors from the former Soviet Union, they do not intend, neither Russia or China, to occupy initially. They want to use a preemptive nuclear strike to neutralize the United States and England, where the major nuclear powers...
And then start power grabbing other areas.
And then blackmail Europe into submission. They want to take Europe without a fight. Now, the globalists will make sure that they don't let the Europeans capitulate. They will then start a war. So the stage two is the Russians and Chinese still not wanting to invade, because it's a long way. It's just suicide to start, just like Hitler, getting too far into Russia. Couldn't sustain that pipeline of military material. Russia and China aren't eager to try to do that. They're going to use surrogates in Latin America to come north to destabilize the United States. What they aren't counting on, of course, is the U.S. is planning to take this nuclear first strike, to then feign completely being down, to drum us into a militarized New World Order. It won't be the United Nations. They'll call it the League of Democracies. They'll exclude all the communist nations, as they should have in the beginning. They purposely let them all into the United Nations because they wanted to create conflict, as we've been talking about. What they aren't anticipating, though, is that the U.S. will bring out all of these high-tech weapons that they're hiding, hand them out to Europe.
Because I've talked to Bob Bowman, and he can only talk about what they've leaked on accident. Star Wars was around in the 70s, and by 79, they had total decapitation systems with DU meteor gun sabos, robotic, basically satellites up there that have non-nuclear, but it's a meteor gun. It'll kill people a mile under the ground. It'll go right through a mountain, and they've got a lot of these. He said in the 70s, and he's the former head of Star Wars. They already had those up there. So there's undoubtedly a lot of secret technology.
There is. I've got confirmation of that as well. But they will still allow those first strikes to hit And then they may limit additional strikes, but they want to make sure there's enough destruction in the United States to drive the American people into complete despair so that they throw down all their barriers and just say to the government.
Well, that's the same model as what 9/11 is. Take the attack, then invade a bunch of countries.
That's right. But this time, the attack is going to be on America. It's going to shock America. We aren't prepared for it. We've never expected America to be attacked. It will happen someday, I can guarantee people. And so, but in the long-term scenario, I think what happens, though, is that we'd never regain our country back in terms of liberty. But there will be bastions and pockets, because one of the things they do lose control of in a nuclear attack is they lose the continuity of government that they're preserving. I mean, it's still there, but it doesn't control all parts of the country.
Yeah, they've got the central systems.
They've got the central system. There's based in Washington, D.C., which is going to be fairly well destroyed.
And Colorado.
They've got Denver as one of the major centers. That's the major control. Now, I suspect that the New World Order is going to move into Denver after Colorado, or after Washington, D.C. is.
They pretty much already have. I mean, they visit their prostitutes in D.C.
Yeah. But ultimately, I think for the cause of liberty, it's going to be, and one of the reasons why I believe so much in strategic relocation, there are going to be pockets of resistance. And it's going to be noised about, and rumors will abound of people saying there's liberty here and there's liberty there and there's safety here, and people will start to migrate. Our greatest weakness, Alex, is that we're all spread out uniformly around the United States, and we don't have a majority anywhere. The Free State movement tried to change that by moving into either Wyoming or New Hampshire. They chose New Hampshire, unfortunately, which is not in a strategic relocation. But the idea was to move in enough people to have a majority. Now, that always backfires. It backfired to the Rajneesh that tried to move in and created a haven in Oregon. It backfired for the Mormons trying to move into Missouri and then Illinois. You know, people just say, hey, they're moving in, they're going to outvote us, kick them out. Of course, the Mormons were anti-slavery, and so they got kicked out. The same thing's happened to the Free State people. New Hampshire's building up an movement. Chuck Baldwin's running into the same thing. The powers that be are able to inflame that Chuck Baldwin and these radical constitutional conservatives are coming in to take over Montana. And, to a certain extent, yeah, we want to take over in the name of liberty, but the establishment uses that to gain fear.
I don't think Montanans will be stupid, though. I mean, I think they're not going to buy that.
Well, we can't, it's not there is that old mining, liberal, corrupt mentality in Montana as well. And there is the typical apathetic majority, which can be talked in to demonizing someone as good as Chuck Baldwin. I'm not saying the cause is lost. I'm just saying you have to be very, very careful not to wave the old liberty flag in saying we're going to take over, because it backfires. But I think during war, what's going to happen is we are going to have pockets of liberty. People are going to be driven out of the major cities. There's no job to keep them there.
Well, it's already happening. I mean, I go to the store now, and it's going back to the land, going back to the frontier. Those magazines are everywhere, and people instinctively are buying guns and getting ready and racing to the countryside, even if it's in a haphazard way. That's why Strategic Relocation, available at Infowars.com, 3rd edition, just out, is so important. And the video, just type in Secrets of Survival, Joel Skousen, to watch the hour-and-a-half presentation. It's free online, folks, and very important. And Joel's here, by the way, to tape like a 2-hour special report to really get into it for folks, because this is so important. It'll be out for everybody in a few months here. But Joel, we're about to go to break. We're running out of time here. How will it add to things that we've been here beforehand warning, and that millions of guns, it was 1 million a month and 2 million, 1 month, 4 or 5 million. I mean, people are really, police, military, they all are really starting to wake up.
It helps, Alex, because people are getting preconditioned in their thinking of where safe places are, so that they're not moving. Most people aren't moving because they're stuck with their jobs in the big city. But when those are destroyed, when social unrest comes and drives them out, the job is no longer holding them back. Neither is family, neither is climate. They only think, where were those cities that Alex talked about that were safe? And they're going to start to migrate. On foot, on car, by hook and by crook, you're going to find a movement of people consolidating together, and we're going to end up with majorities of liberty-minded people in areas that will be able to resist this new world order that they're putting upon us.
Well, but I mean, what about being able to reverse this if enough people wake up to what's happening? Because I know the globalists are digging in for some type of mega death scenario.
But it has to be reversed in pockets.
What about the globalists just releasing race-specific bioweapons like Cheney talked about? I mean, I agree the scenario you talked about, the evidence is there. That's what the evidence shows. And I know you've got some documents that back a lot of it up, but it seems like they've got other scenarios in the background as well. It's
true, but ultimately we have to depend on God balancing the issue. They could destroy us. They have these weapons and things, but somehow, you know, he doesn't help us an awful lot. We are always fighting against a wall. I think America's destined, because of the sins and the evils of the people, to take some tribulation, a severe, destruction. But out of that, there will be balance, and I think the Lord's going to manage that to keep. I mean, he has to, by his own principles, to allow. That's what happens in history over and over again. Final segment with Joel Skousen straight ahead.
Going down, and the eyes in
Strategic Relocation, excellent book. And it's important to think about all this because the elites are all digging in like it is going to be the end of the world. And I assure you, it's not the Mayan calendar. It's not Keebler elves on a planet X coming to get us. It is nuclear war, chemical, biological. They're not building seed vaults and DNA vaults with, guards and things for no reason. And I got Dick Cheney, talking about how they need to use race-specific bioweapons. This is serious, and it needs to be discussed. It needs to be talked about. Also, DHS to release bacteria in Boston's subway system. That's the top story at Infowars.com. That is extremely important. You've got all these martial law drills, but I don't see it as one big martial law. They're just phasing it in, getting everybody accustomed to a soft martial law, and pretty soon you're in a hard martial law. Do you agree with that statement?
Absolutely. This Chicago thing, NATO summit, they're at once fomenting it. They're probably going to move in protesters just so that they can justify.
Then they attack peaceful people instead of them. Yeah.
That's right. Then for the first time, they're going to start moving people out prior to it and say, you're either quarantined here or you leave.
Yeah, they said. At first it started the area right around. Now they're saying more, you got to go.
Yeah. And so they're getting ready to really get people used to having government come in and dictate where you will be, how you will move, and when you will move. It's a very, very bad precedent. But I agree with you. It's not going to mean martial law is imminent across the United States. These are pockets. These are practice martial law. They don't even have enough manpower to do a nationwide martial law. You won't see that till war comes, in my opinion.
Yeah, they're just beta testing. But then you've got you can't leave the country if the IRS says so.
Exactly.
Unprecedented tyranny.
But not internationally. We saw that happen in South Africa. When it was clamping down, the ANC took over. Suddenly, don't let the whites leave. Or at least if they want to leave, don't let them take their money. Same thing happened to Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, currency controls. We're starting to see that in terms of tax evasion, tax laws as the excuse for that. But they're aiming on making sure nobody can escape the country to avoid what's coming.
Wow, but then you go to other countries, when all this happens, it's going to be hellish there as well, because all of this is the backdrop of the Agenda 21, where they openly say they want to impoverish everybody.
Yes, a lot of people, unfortunately, think that the nice expat community in Costa Rica is living high on the hog and cheap, and therefore that's the solution. They don't realize that those countries are also controlled by globalists. If they say shut down the Americans, confiscate their bank accounts, it's going to happen overnight, and there are no legal protections, and there's no resistance except the expats there, and they're a tiny minority.
And you lived all over the world.
That's right. I've lived in Latin America in all of these countries, and I can tell you there isn't anywhere in the world where you've got millions capable of resisting.
But see, that's what's sad. I've studied history. I've been in different parts of the world. It's sad to be in a third world despotism with the police or thugs, and to see our system turning into that, it's painful to watch.
And this is a very important change that you mentioned, the transition to thugs. William Grigg Jr. documents every single week. What I have a file, I'm just building a file from his and many others called Bad Cops. And it's just getting epidemic, the amount of ex-military type, shaved heads, overweight, but thuggish in their mentality, and just reaping terrible injustices on people. And the judges are backing them up. Normally, you would think you'd take these people, you have them filmed, you have them recorded, you take it to court. They just throw that evidence out. The judges are protecting thuggish behavior. And that's so that there are no penalties, so that you can continue to attract people of that mentality. That's the whole thing about why they hired mercenaries at much greater cost to replace U.S. military. They're building the future thugs that will take down America.
Well said, Joel. Well said. And we're going to do a 2-hour special on all of this. It's so important.